What's up, everybody? I am back with another reaction video. This is coming from a new one that came across my channel from Lady Decade, and her video about hate the audience get fired seems very interesting, and I want to check it out. And I'm pretty sure I know what she's referencing, but definitely follow her channel and definitely like the video. Leave a comment below, let me know what you guys think, as well as follow my channels on my Twitch and YouTube channel as I stream video games, react to videos, as well as review comics, movies, and TV shows and new video games. Once I'm done with them, I review the video games that I tend to play. The new one's gonna be coming out, Resident Evil Requiem, within a couple of weeks, or actually, yeah, a couple of weeks from now. So super excited about that. But without further ado, let's check out Lady Decade.
For years now, Ubisoft has been telling players that if they don't like the games, then the problem is actually not the games. It's you, the players, you. You're the problem. You're toxic, you're entitled, you're part of a so-called hate audience that just doesn't understand modern design, modern storytelling or modern values, and yet, release after release of bloated, joyless, creatively bankrupt titles, it isn't just the players being shown the door, it's also the developers. Layoffs, studio closures, careers evaporating, not because the audience was wrong or anything, but because the audience was right.
God, this game looks so ugly.
So, today we're going to talk about how Ubisoft's own staff helped alienate its customers, squander decades of goodwill, and repeatedly ship undercooked, directionless.
I'm pretty sure a lot of these developers actually look at this as like, and they usually is Blizzard or Ubisoft, they actually pat themselves on the back for what they put out.
Games, all while publicly framing their paying audience as the problem, and how after years of contempt for players and professional complacency, the same people now seem shocked that the consequences have finally arrived. I am Lady Decade, and if you like your gaming news spicy, then hit that subscribe button, because it's time to talk about why hating your audience leads to unemployment.
A class. In this world, it is something that the goddess blesses us.
Ubisoft might be responsible for a lot of slop and gaming fecal matter that they have smeared all over the games industry, but thankfully not all modern releases are bad. Right now you can grab 36% off Quarantine Zone The Last Check, 29% off Star Rupture, and a hefty 47% off Escape the Backrooms, which means you can pick it up for under $5, and that's just the start. You can use my links below to get discounts of up to 90% off of thousands of modern releases. Each purchase helps support this channel, and if you really love what I do, you can access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more by becoming a backer over on Patreon. So happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. When Jeff Keighley, of all people, posts that Ubisoft has just cancelled 6 games, delayed 7 more, and closed 2 entire studios, you can almost hear the internet sharpening its knives. For a lot of players, this feels like justice. This is the publisher that turned every franchise into a copy-paste open world. The company that chased live service trends while its classics gathered dust were finally addressing some long-term problems. When a company this awful finally announces what it calls a major organisational, operational and portfolio reset, it might be time to pay some attention. For years, staff at Ubisoft have been operating on a level of contempt for its own audience that's almost impressive in its brazenness. They watched players beg for tighter, more focused games. They heard the complaints about bloated open worlds, about the aggressive live service monetization, about the dreadful tonality of panned games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Star Wars Outlaws, and their response was to double down, work on even more of the same stuff, and act like anyone criticising them was somehow just not understanding their vision.
Yeah, it's pretty much like no accountability whatsoever, because if they listen to these criticisms, legit criticisms, then they have to admit that they put out lazy writing, lazy animation slop. They have to admit that. Rarely you see like any accountability. I think the last time a video game company or developer took any accountability for the kind of stuff they put out would have been Cyberpunk. I think Cyberpunk is one of those rare moments where the developers acknowledged their issues and made eager strives to correct the problem, and fully admit the onus was on them. They didn't blame the audience in no shape or form. They took responsibility. Ubisoft, for example, it was like, as of right now of the making of this video, I do not believe they will take any ownership, any responsibility for their choices as to why their company is tanking as it is. And Blizzard will be on that freaking list too, mind you, but we're kind of focusing on Ubisoft right here.
Yes, there's a very real sense in which this so-called major reset is actually exactly what players have been asking for. People losing their jobs have been artists and programmers. The QA teams, the support staff and the junior developers are now hurriedly polishing CVs in an industry already choking on layoffs. Because while they didn't sit at the top table signing off on strategy decks, they still built the products, defended the direction and kept the machine running long after it was obvious that it was broken. The contempt for the audience was public, the priorities were clear and the culture was enforced internally for years. At some point, participation becomes complicity. This so-called reset is coming out after years of bad decisions, groupthink and quiet compliance. So let me run through with you the updates that have been announced in the past few days. On the 20th and 21st of January 2026, Ubisoft announced what leadership breathlessly described as a major organisational, operational and portfolio reset. Translated into plain English, that means 6 games were cancelled. Dead. Among them was the Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake, which we'll come back to, alongside 1 mobile title and 4 unannounced projects. 3 of those 4 were brand new intellectual property, so Ubisoft hasn't just pulled the plug on struggling legacy projects, it looked at multiple original ideas in active development and decided that they weren't worth seeing through at all. And it doesn't stop there. 7 more games have been delayed. Ubisoft naturally refuses to say which ones, but reporting strongly suggests that at least one of them is the Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag remaster that was supposedly lined up for release before April of 2026. It's now been pushed back to some point before April of 2027. That's an entire year shaved off the release window of a project that was already behind. To add to the carnage, 2 studios have gone outright: Ubisoft Halifax and Ubisoft Stockholm. Shut down, wiped off the old map, and in Halifax alone, more than 70 people are suddenly out of work, with staff in Stockholm facing the same fate. These were long-standing studios with active projects and years sunk into Ubisoft's pipeline, and Ubisoft still pulled the plug without hesitation. Experience didn't save them, loyalty didn't save them, and time served didn't matter either.
Are you struggling in your calculus class? Do you have a hard time understanding your instructor?
Beyond the outright closures, there's the familiar corporate euphemism of restructuring. Massive Entertainment, the studio behind The Division and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, has been hit. Ubisoft Abu Dhabi has been hit. Red Links, the team behind Trials, has been hit too. Different regions, different teams, same outcome. Fewer people, less stability, and absolutely no sense that anyone is safe. And then there's the return to office mandate. 5 days a week and company-wide. Minimal remote allowances and no wriggle room. Because when Ubisoft announces a so-called reset and immediately follows it by ending working from home, shutting down a perk that's been running on borrowed time ever since COVID. And for years now, parts of the so-called Ubisoft workforce have been allowed to operate at arm's length, logging in from spare rooms and kitchen tables while productivity, output and accountability steadily eroded across the company. Even Ubisoft isn't blind to that, so the company is finally calling time on an arrangement that was never meant to be permanent to begin with. The new message behind the scenes is very blunt. The free ride is over. If your job only works when you're not actually there, then maybe it doesn't work at all. Come back into the office like everyone else, or accept that the arrangement that you've been enjoying for over half a decade was conditional and not a right. Management seems to be reasserting control after years of indulgence and letting the people who can't or won't adapt remove themselves from the system. It feels like Ubisoft's leadership has finally sat down with the numbers, saw its market share hemorrhaging, watched release after release fail to land, and realised that they could no longer keep pretending the formula was still viable. For years, their approach was brutally simple: flood the markets with content, chase the live service mirage, monetize everything that moved, and bank on players being too disengaged or exhausted to walk away. For a while, that gamble paid off. Until it didn't. The moment the audience stopped showing up in sufficient numbers, the moment the revenue dipped, the illusion finally collapsed. And what had been sold internally as a sustainable bundle was exposed as a bloated, fragile house of cards. If you want a single example that captures just how badly Ubisoft has mishandled its own catalogue, you don't need to look any further than the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time remake. It's a textbook case of institutional arrogance, endless internal churn, and a company so paralysed by its own processes that it forgot how to make a clear creative decision at all. The original Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was released in 2003, and it became a classic for a reason. It was tightly designed, mechanically confident, and refreshingly disciplined. The level design was very precise. The systems were elegant.
Isn't that like a Prince of Persia side-scroller kind of thing? Kind of like what they did with Strider Hiryu. I could have sworn there was something like that.
And the pacing knew when to move on, and crucially, it understood exactly what it was trying to be, and it just worked at the end of the day. So when Ubisoft announced a remake, the reaction was cautious optimism. This was one of their most beloved games. They had the budget, they had the manpower, and 2 decades of hindsight, so this should have been easy. The remake was announced in 2020. Pitched as a straightforward modernisation, better visuals, updated controls, same core experience. Development was led by Ubisoft at Pune and Mumbai, and the first footage immediately set off alarm bells. It looked cheap, stiff, and oddly disconnected from the original's tone, not because of hardware limitations, but because of taste. It looked like a timid, outsourced approximation, yet it passed internal review anyway. When players pushed back, the criticism wasn't subtle or anything like that. People said it didn't look like a Prince of Persia at all. It looked like a knockoff wearing the same name, and instead of taking that feedback seriously, the response from inside Ubisoft at the time was the familiar one: shuffle responsibility, reassign teams, restart production, and pretend the problem was structural rather than creative. The original studios were taken off the project, control moved to Ubisoft Montreal, and the game was redesigned. Again, at every stage, people were paid to sign off on this. You know, approve milestones and nod along in meetings to defend choices that clearly were not landing, and there were years of employees collectively failing to recognise what made the original work, still insisting that they knew better. The Sands of Time remake collapsed because too many people were involved who either didn't understand the source material or didn't care enough to push back when it was being mishandled. And that's the through line: a long chain of so-called professionals who kept showing up, cashing checks, and delivering something which plainly was not good enough. Delays piled up because nobody involved could bring the thing to a conclusion. The 2022 target disappeared, the 2023 target followed it, and by 2024, all that remained was the familiar fog of corporate language. Not before 2026, which translated honestly means that the teams working on it no longer had a coherent plan or a shared understanding of what they were even trying to finish. You could say that the game slipped through the sands of time.
You've dreamed of publishing a novel someday. Kickstart your author career with 50,000.
Very good. Very good.
As of January 2026, it seems that Ubisoft has finally stopped pretending. The project is now cancelled. It is properly dead. After 6 years of development, multiple studio hands.
As a kid, I remember playing like a demo of Sands of Time. I never actually had it wholesale, but I remember playing a little bit, and I guess as a kid I was confused how to make that reversal of time work for me. I definitely remember I didn't have that much of enjoyment out of it. Not saying it was a terrible game. I just, as a kid, there's certain games that I was probably too young to understand the mechanics of.
Handovers, endless redesigns, and millions in burned wages and overhead. The people attached to it failed to produce anything that was worth releasing, which is quite frankly ridiculous because Ubisoft knew how to make it. The design language existed, the mechanics existed, the pacing, the structure and the identity, they were all there in black and white. And all that really was required was competence and restraint. And they still couldn't even manage to do that. Which tells you something important. Either the people working on this were so entangled in meetings, revisions and internal politicking that no one was capable of making and defending a clear creative decision, or they simply lacked the understanding and confidence to execute a straightforward remake without endlessly second-guessing themselves. When a company can no longer remake one of its own best games, when a team spends 6 years circling the drain and produces nothing, that's a workforce problem. A culture where nobody takes ownership, nobody draws a line, and no one's willing to say, this is good enough, ship it. And eventually the bill for that kind of paralysis comes due. And here's what's really silly. None of this is mysterious. None of it happens by accident. Corporations don't make decisions, people do. Ubisoft isn't some sentient machine that's malfunctioned. It's a workplace filled with human beings who made daily choices about what to tolerate, what to defend, and what to sign off on.
Yeah, a lot of these, game developers cannot stand on business and trust the material that they're putting out or creating. Marvel Rivals is doing gangbusters right now and not kowtowing to certain individuals out there who don't feel so good about themselves and want to be seen in every little thing imaginable. But no, they understand who they're marketing to. They understand who the primary customers are. They understand what the primary customers expect to see. And they're benefiting from it, and they stand on it. But it's usually the ones that are standing on it are from the Eastern Bloc. It's the Western Bloc that is backpedaling or second guessing themselves because they're tiptoeing around not offending somebody, or they they just can't understand, okay, who is this marketed to? Who's going to be primary buyers? What are they going to be expected from this? And go with that. They can't seem to agree. This should be a layup, to be honest. Like Prince of Persia, primarily most games are boys games, but primarily this is going to be a boys game. Get a cool main male character. And the hot female protagonist fighting out the bad guys, getting the dagger that controls the sands of time. You already got the blueprint. You just remaking it. And I think, this is just my guess here, but I think this remake, not a remaster, because a remaster is just the same thing, just with updated graphics. I talked about this in a whole different video a couple years ago. A remaster is just the same thing, but with updated graphics. Remix, which clearly this was supposed to be, that's what they titled it, is trying to implement new age stuff or new dialogue, for the modern audience, and not trying to offend anybody because they got like a particular demographic, or at least with like a Persian, characters involved, and not wanting to look, that's racist. They're trying to put in certain things that wasn't there before. Clearly that's what it was, because you already got the blueprint. What was wrong with it originally, with the original one that worked so well? Clearly there were some things back then that probably wouldn't play so well nowadays, but you're trying to fix something that wasn't broken, clearly. But now through all these other hands that you keep passing along, they could not make this work. Clearly you was doing something that probably wasn't gonna fit, wasn't gonna sit too well with the majority of the audience who grew up with Prince of Persia. They knew that, and with the failed stuff prior to this, it's like, ooh, okay, because clearly you was trying to do something that you did with the previous games that didn't work so well, that tanked, and it's like now you gotta take it off the market altogether because you couldn't make it work despite the many hands it passed off to. You was up to something. He knew for well you could not release it.
And this is what institutional hubris looks like when it finally collides with reality. Because for years, the people inside Ubisoft convinced themselves that their collective process, the engine, their approvals and internal checks, etc., could brute force quality out of anything. That belief didn't solely live in the boardrooms, it lived on the actual production floors, in stand-ups, in review meetings and in Slack channels, and people learned that it was safer to comply than to challenge, easier to follow a process than to take responsibility, and more comfortable to blame the system than admit something simply wasn't working. They believed that they were smarter than their audience, that the formula was universal, that players would eventually fall in line, and thousands of employees at every level reinforced that belief by continuing to build, defend and promote products that they knew weren't landing. That isn't a form of coercion, that is active participation.
When life gives you overripe bananas, bust out your mixing bowl.
This shouldn't have been that hard. It is like somebody behind the scenes was trying to, well, at least initially, was trying to actively put something in there that wasn't supposed to be there, but they end up walking it back and they couldn't
vanish just because it's shared. Ubisoft's problems weren't caused by projects, markets or impossible standards. They were caused by people who showed up every single day, accepted the direction and helped sustain a culture that rewarded obedience over outcomes. And when that culture finally collapsed under its own weight, the consequences were inevitable. For years, the complaints from the gaming community have not been subtle. Ubisoft's design philosophy has calcified into a formula, a template that employees dutifully stamped onto every franchise, whether it's fit or not. And the people building these games knew exactly what they were doing. When players pushed back, the internal response was never reflection or humility. It was dismissal. Pure dismissal. Developers, producers and community-facing staff repeatedly insisted that players just didn't understand the market and that the data proved that this was what people actually wanted. And that criticism came from unsophisticated audiences who couldn't grasp the brilliance of the model. Franchises were treated like content factories and audiences were treated like walking wallets, and anyone inside or outside the company who questioned this direction was ignored, overruled or told to get with the program.
There's a lack of creativity. There's no true passion behind these projects. It's just like you're you get either activists or people who just only focus on the business aspect, putting this crap out there with no soul to it, with no uniqueness, without afraid to offend people to a degree. It is, and let's be real. A few of these are pretty much like probably AI, generated slop, right? Like they key into certain things because they're so corrupt, creatively bankrupt that you thought something like Assassin's Creed Shadows was any way a good idea, or Ghost of Yotei was any way a good idea.
It wasn't just the leadership barking orders into a vacuum, it was a workforce that kept executing bad ideas long after the evidence piled up that it wasn't working. So when Ubisoft is finally forced to admit that the formula has collapsed, when players are so tired of the routine that they simply stop buying and 6 games are cancelled while 7 more are delayed, there is a very real sense in which this is the market's functioning exactly as it should. You shipped contemptuous products, defended them aggressively, and dismissed criticism for years. So the players walked away. Consequently.
And, it also doesn't help that you got hot actresses playing fuglified characters in video games. And like the corporate people don't want to lose any bottom line, don't want to get boycotted, on Twitter or whatever by super leftists that are ashamed they don't look like Emma Frost or Scarlet Witch, so they want to get pissy about it, and they're afraid of those type of people. They ain't gonna do jack crap about nothing, so they give this little just unappealing characters out there that, because they don't the unappealing characters out there, so they don't want to upset those slubby people or slubby type of women out there in the world who probably ain't playing this game anywhere. They just want to feel seen in every little demographic imaginable, even if they don't watch or play any of it. They just want to, because they're so got main character syndrome, or they think they're so important, they want to just take over, and they want to appeal to the quote-unquote male gaze. And corporations or developers, some of them are listening to this crap. That's why the term sex sells has been the capitalism touchstone since the 80s, because put a hot woman on it, it's going to generate money, because girls want to be her, guys want to be with her. It's the flip side to something like James Bond. Guys want to be him, girls want to be with him. They need to stop listening to these like crazy activists or the fringe people on the internet when they know what is going to drive sales for their content. And it's like, now Ubisoft, I'm worried that there won't be a Ubisoft within the next couple of years unless they find a way to make a banger of a game that's prioritized layered characters, smart writing, and isn't afraid to push certain lines, and don't backpedal when a few people get up in arms about it. Definitely don't hire no activists, whether it's writing or as actors. Don't bring them on because they ruin everything. And maybe, just maybe, they might pull themselves out of the muck. Take Marvel Rivals, just for an example, as something to aspire to. Know what makes them work and apply it.
Is followed. It's the direct outcome of having every opportunity to course correct and choosing not to. And yeah, there is something undeniably satisfying about watching a company that spent a decade talking down to its audience finally run headfirst into reality. And to absorb the financial hit of their own prolonged failure, the response at the top has been predictable: throw everyone who worked for the company overboard and call it a reset. Whenever there are mass layoffs in the games industry, there is always a certain level of sympathy, especially from the traditional games media. But we have to remember that none of these people were dragged along helplessly. They were willingly part of the machine that produced the collapse. And now they're out, joining an industry that's already hemorrhaging jobs. Tens of thousands gone over the past 2 years. Studio after studio closing. Month after month of layoffs, a job market so saturated that updating LinkedIn has become a reflex rather than a plan. Not every employee at Ubisoft is waiting for this inevitable storm to hit the shoreline. Most famously of all, back in 2020, Guillaume Broche was working at Ubisoft. He wasn't a victim, and he wasn't struggling. He'd worked on Might and Magic, Ghost Recon Breakpoint and The Division 2. A solid track record, a stable career, plenty of reasons to stay. And he left anyway. Not because he was mistreated or because he'd been forced out or anything like that. According to interviews, he was bored working for such a creatively deficient company. He looked at the approval layers, the committees, the endless risk filtering, the way ideas were slowly sanded down until nothing interesting remained, and he decided he didn't want to waste his time pretending that was normal. So he walked. He founded Sandfall Interactive, and he started to work on something genuinely new, a project nobody at Ubisoft would...
Yeah, I mentioned in my review after I was finished with Expedition 33 that a lot of people from Ubisoft splintered off, made their own thing, Sandfall, and made a banger of a game because they prioritized story, creativity, passion, layered characters, you know, good-looking characters, mind you, and the masses spoke up and voted with their wallets and said, this is how you make a video game. Pitch perfect example. This and Marvel Rivals are like pitch perfect examples of how you make video games for everyone and not a subsection of the community that will probably half of which won't play it anyway.
Ever have greenlit a turn-based RPG with no brand recognition and no live service hooks. Claire Obscure, Expedition 33, and that's the difference. One group stayed, adapted, and helped keep a broken system alive until it collapsed on top of them, and one person recognised the rot early and noped out of there. Ubisoft's recent reset doesn't just expose bad leadership, it exposes how many people were willing to tolerate that leadership for as long.
And I'm pretty sure it was, you know, Ubisoft, somebody in Ubisoft, you know, tried to make Sandfall look bad by saying, oh, they use AI in their games, which is like, what, like a painting or two, and it only lasted like a couple of weeks after the game's released, and they passed that up. That shows the level of pettiness and jealousy and no accountability on their part by trying to like tank another upcoming potentially world-breaking studio that will like blow everybody else out of the water. It pains me to see that kind of stuff, because Sandfall, I hope that Sandfall will continuously maintain course and make banger after game, banger after game, banger after game, and show all these so-called AAA studios how to make quality video games like we used to back in the day.
As the paychecks cleared. Expedition 33 was built with a core team of about 33 people. Some were former Ubisoft staff who'd reached the same conclusion and left, and some were new hires who had never been socialised into Ubisoft's approval culture in the first place. They worked lean, they trusted each other, and they made decisions quickly, owned them, and moved on. And the result was a game that's...
I still kind of laugh to see, like, you know, Erica Ishii's like meme face at the Game Awards, and she's eating popcorn, whereas she shouldn't have been eating anything on the floor. That's per their policy not to have any food or drinks while on the show floor. But apparently she's able to get through, get past all that for some doggone reason. But she nor Go Coyote won anything, which was a funny highlight of the entire show.
Felt confident, coherent, and actually alive. They shipped it in 2025 and it detonated dozens of Game of the Year awards. So many, in fact, that it surpassed the record set even by Elden Ring. Millions of copies sold, and 6 months later is still selling exceptionally well. Not because of brand inertia or monetization tricks, but because people genuinely wanted to play it. And Ubisoft? Well, Ubisoft is currently sitting in the wreckage of its own collapsed portfolio. That contrast is lethal to every excuse that Ubisoft employees have been leaning on for years. It's complicated, the market is hostile, modern development is too hard. No, it isn't. Sensible Interactive has just proved none of that holds up. The success of Expedition 33 shows what happens when capable adults stop behaving like cogs in a machine and start acting like people who actually want to ship something worth playing. So, after the many, many layoffs, what's Ubisoft's actual plan here? Because at some point, you have to have an idea of what's coming next. Well, enter the creative houses. This is Ubisoft's latest organisational reshuffle. Genre and brand-focused business units, each responsible for its own development, publishing and financial outcomes. On paper, it's about autonomy, about empowering creative leadership, about streamlining decision-making, and it reads beautifully in a press release, and it gives everyone involved a fresh set of titles and reporting lines.
No meal brings people together better than a classic Wisconsin fish fry. Hand-battered cod.
The problem is, though, that it could end up fixing absolutely nothing. Ubisoft's own statements make it clear that the actual creative direction hasn't changed at all. The future rests on two pillars: open world adventures and gas native experiences, and that's it. That's the reset. That's the big idea. Translated honestly, it's the same formula being pushed by the same kinds of people, just reorganised so responsibility is even harder to trace. They will have the same checklists, the same live service grind, and the same monetization.
Yeah, they try to be slick. And I'm pretty sure the movie industry will probably do the exact same thing. Oh, isn't there a DEI program or office? We'll restructure it as I don't know, cultural understanding, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. Don't fall for it. They're trying to, avoid any accountability. Call in something else so they can, skirt by for a while until things die down and then, try to come back in full force. No, it need to be stamped out permanently. They need, a lot of these companies need to do a mass culling. Damn their feelings.
Logic, just with different managers' names at the top of the slide deck. And if your response to years of creative collapse, to sustained player complaints, to a portfolio that feels exhausted and cynical is simply, we're going to do this more efficiently, then you haven't learned anything. You've just found a faster way to keep failing. And the people implementing this structure know that. They're not being dragged into it unwillingly, they nodded along, rebuilding the same machine and hoping this time the optics hold and they can carry on cashing paychecks at the expense of gamers. So they've brought in consultants, redrawn the org chart and declared progress, but Ubisoft's culture still won't trust creative instinct, still won't value games as finished works, and will still end up viewing every project primarily as a revenue extraction system. And this is where I'll land on all of it. It's perfectly reasonable, healthy even, to feel a sense of satisfaction that Ubisoft can no longer get away with churning out the same cynical product forever. The market worked, players said no repeatedly, and eventually that no showed up in Ubisoft's financials, and that's how the system is supposed to function. What's harder to sit with, but far more important, is recognising that the people now paying the price weren't innocent bystanders. They weren't powerless observers trapped in a broken system. They were the system. They built it, they defended it and normalised it and kept it running long after it was clear that it wasn't working. Ubisoft deserved to fail, and the consequences of that failure are brutal. And as gamers, not one of us should respect them or give them the benefit of the doubt. We should treat every corporate line about resets and creative leadership and enhanced quality expectations with the skepticism that they deserve. These phrases exist to manage perception and not to describe real change. As for us, we should continue to put our money where it actually counts, support the studios that opted out of this culture entirely and proved that there was another way to work. Studios like Sandsfall Interactive, whose work on Clair Obscur Expedition 33 demonstrated that a small, confident team can outperform a 1,000-person corporate machine when it's allowed to act like one. That's the lesson Ubisoft refuses to learn, but you don't have to. The only real vote you have is what you spend your money on, and personally, I'd rather reward the people who escaped a broken system and built something worth playing than pretend Ubisoft has learned a single thing from this so-called reset. And don't forget that...
Well, I gotta say, I think I mentioned it during the Game Awards show, the actress who played, I think it was Marielle on Expedition 33, the redhead. I did not care for that actress who went on that stage to accept the award she did earn. She did deserve that. I'm not saying that, but then mentioning, like her girlfriend or queer folk, something like that is like falls under the category of the whole woke thing. As honestly, I was like, oh my god, she's like, I don't want to sit there and make assumptions like she's one of them, but it's just, I can't help but like, they earned that. They earned the cringe, honestly, because we've been, pummeled with that kind of, mess for years now. And so a person who's probably legitimately understands the purpose behind Sandsfall and believe what they're probably doing, I don't want to believe that she's like one of something like Erika Ishiki or Rachel Zegler. I don't want to believe she's falls in that category. But it's just kind of what she would have just accepted the award, thanked the company and manager, like her god or whatever like that, and just move along. But it's just, I'm sorry, I just had to point that out. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's I'm pretty sure she's, all well intentioned. I want to take it on good faith with her. But it's just ugh, God.
Not all modern releases are terrible. Right now, you can grab 36% off Quarantine Zone, the last check, 29% off Star Rupture, and a hefty...
Okay, that's pretty much it. Yeah, man. I definitely agree. Ubisoft... God. Like I said before, I don't think... If they don't make some legit, serious changes, take... stock in how Sandsfall had made a banger of a game and a highly successful game, and learn from it, and make strives to implement that in their own company, and will greatly help if they, while they're trying to fire everybody, they should focus on firing all these activists, these departments that implement these little quotas and check boxes and all that stuff, and bring in people who understand story creation, and passion behind the creativity. Bring in those people, because those are the kind of people that earns the praise and the revenue and the accolades. That's just my thought. Anyway, leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys next time for more content. Got a lot more reaction videos to do tomorrow, but I'm calling it a night. But look forward to more content later. Take care, and I'll see you all soon. Peace.